So you want to invade New Zealand, and I want to acknowledge, before we open the file, that your staff thinks this one is a joke. Their briefing reads like satire. A nation of around 5 million people, outnumbered roughly 5 to 1 by sheep. A defense force of about 15,000, counting the reserves. 2 frigates. And the line your planners keep reading aloud at parties. In 2001, New Zealand looked at its fighter jets, all of them, and retired them. Disbanded the entire air combat force. Canceled the replacement deal. And then, for a quarter of a century, never bought another combat jet. Not one. This is, as far as this court can determine, the only wealthy nation on Earth that unilaterally declared peace and stuck with it. Its old Skyhawk fighters, and this detail is real, were eventually sold to an American company. And today, they earn a living flying as the pretend enemy in United States war games. New Zealand's Air Force did not die. It went into acting. So yes, on paper, this is the softest file in the cabinet. No jets, no enemies, no plan. And the audit still comes back stamped denied, for a reason no other country on this planet can claim. A reason measured not in years, not in centuries, but against the entire history of the human species. Stay to the end, because the final line item in this bill is the oldest one this court has ever read. Let us start with the number that quietly runs this whole episode, the distance. Find New Zealand on a globe and notice what surrounds it. Water and then more water, and then, eventually, Australia, the nearest real neighbor, about 1,300 miles away. A 3-hour flight, which by New Zealand standards counts as next door, and which happens to be family. In every other direction, the nearest anything is a scatter of small Pacific islands, and beyond them, nothing for thousands of miles. From the coast of East Asia, an invasion fleet sails more than 5,500 miles of open Pacific. For calibration, take the largest seaborne invasion ever attempted. On D-Day, the Allies crossed about 100 miles of the English Channel, with some 7,000 vessels, after 2 full years of planning, with total command of sea and sky. And it still nearly failed on one of the 5 beaches. Your crossing is 55 times longer, with no friendly England to stage from, because the only staging ground in the hemisphere is Australia, and Australia is on the other team. And you will not be sailing quietly, because here is the first surprise hiding inside the softest file in the cabinet. New Zealand is a full member of the Five Eyes, the intelligence alliance of the United States, Britain, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, the most powerful surveillance partnership in human history. The country with no fighter jets can see everything. Your armada is a tracked object from the morning it loads, across every one of those 5,000 miles, arriving at a shoreline that has had weeks to read your itinerary. The moat is not just wide, the moat has eyes. And that moat has a longer record than any defense in this courtroom, which brings us to the claim I promised, the one no other nation can make. Every country on Earth was reached, settled, and fought over thousands of years ago. Humanity walked into Europe, Asia, Australia, and the Americas tens of thousands of years back. New Zealand, humanity could not reach at all. It was the last substantial habitable landmass on the entire planet to be settled by human beings, only around 750 years ago, and the people who finally cracked it, the ancestors of the Māori, did it with one of the greatest feats of navigation our species has ever produced, crossing thousands of miles of open Pacific in double-hulled sailing canoes, steering by stars, swells, and seabirds, without a compass, without a chart, without a coastline to follow. Read that as a military planner. This country's remoteness defeated the entire human race until the final chapter of the human migration story. And the only people who ever solved the approach did it with the best navigators alive. Then, 3.5 centuries ago, Europe made its first attempt. In 1642, the Dutch explorer Abel Tasman found the place, anchored in a bay at the top of the South Island, and made contact. It went badly. 4 of his sailors were killed in the water. Tasman named the place Murderer's Bay, and the expedition sailed away without one European ever setting foot on New Zealand soil. Write that in the file in capital letters. The first European arrival was repelled before landing. It took another 127 years before Captain Cook returned and got ashore, and when Britain finally did enter, in 1840, it came not with a landing fleet, but with a treaty, signed with Māori chiefs, followed by settlement. And this court will say honestly that what followed that treaty, the wars and the confiscations, is a hard history that New Zealand is still reckoning with today. But note the mechanism, because it repeats across this whole file. Nobody has ever forced this door. The door has only ever opened by negotiation. When it was forced, it bit. And how it bit deserves its own receipt, because inside this file sits one of the most remarkable tactical stories of the 19th century, and your staff has probably never heard it. When war did come between the British Empire and Māori, from the 1840s to the 1860s, the Empire eventually committed one of its largest overseas deployments of the entire Victorian era, somewhere between 14 and 18,000 Imperial troops, backed by artillery and naval gunfire against a few thousand Māori fighters. And those fighters did something the Empire's engineers spent decades trying to understand. They invented a fortress the 19th century could not storm. It was called the P-8, and the modern gunfighter version was not a castle. It was the opposite of a castle. Trenches, bunkers, palisades padded with flax matting that swallowed cannonballs like a mattress swallows a fist. Underground shelters that let defenders sit out a bombardment and pop up firing when the infantry advanced. At Ōhaeawai in 1845, the British shelled a P-8, charged it, and lost around 40% of the storming party in minutes. At Ruapekapeka, the Chief Kawiti built a fortress they called the Bat's Nest, with living chambers dug fully underground, artillery-proof, a design your grandfathers would have recognized instantly from the Western Front. And at Gate Pa in 1864 came the masterpiece. Roughly 230 defenders sat through the heaviest bombardment of the entire war, hour after hour of naval guns and mortars. When some 1,700 British troops assaulted what should have been a graveyard, the garrison rose out of the earth and shattered the attack, killing or wounding more than 100, including 10 officers dead. One of the sharpest defeats the Victorian Army suffered anywhere on Earth that decade. That night, the defenders slipped through the British lines and vanished, and the accounts say they left water beside the wounded British soldiers they could not carry. Military historians have argued, and argued is the right word, so take it to the comments, that the gunfighter Pa anticipated the trench warfare of the First World War by half a century, meaning the tactical system that broke the armies of Europe in 1916 was pioneered by Māori engineers in the 1840s. This court will also record the honest ending. The Empire ultimately prevailed in those wars, not by storming Pa, which kept failing, but by weight of numbers, settlement, and confiscation, a legacy still being addressed in New Zealand today. The tactical verdict, though, stands untouched. When this country's door was forced, the finest army of the age could not carry the fortifications in front of it. Remember that the next time your staff giggles about the sheep. Now, the modern invasion file, and I will be honest with you, it is thin, and its thinness is the comedy and the point. The most successful invasion of New Zealand ever recorded happened in 1873, and it was a newspaper prank. An Auckland paper published a detailed report that a Russian warship had sailed into the harbor and seized the city, and readers panicked, and the invasion was entirely fictional. And the fictional warship's name, read it slowly, was the Kaskowiski, a cask of whiskey. The most effective enemy vessel in New Zealand history was a pun. And here is the part your planners should sit with. The hoax worked on the country too. The scare and a real Russian panic a decade later drove the construction of actual coastal forts, real concrete, real guns, ringing the harbors of Auckland, Wellington, Lyttelton, and Dunedin. Many of those gun pits are still there today, empty, grass growing through them, monuments to the only Russian fleet that ever attacked New Zealand, which existed exclusively in a newspaper column. In the Second World War, the file gains 2 entries, both instructive. German raiders laid mines in New Zealand waters, and in 1941 of them sank the ocean liner Niagara off the northern coast, taking a secret cargo of gold to the bottom, most of which was then recovered in one of the great deep-sea salvage feats of the era. And in March of 1942, a floatplane, launched at night from a Japanese submarine, flew a slow circle over Auckland, looked at the sleeping city, and flew away. Not a shot was fired at it, because not a soul knew it was there. That overflight is the closest any enemy air force has ever come to New Zealand. 1 aircraft, 0 bombs, gone by morning. And when Imperial Japan's planners, at the absolute peak of their power, formally studied invading Australia and rejected it as beyond the Empire's capability, New Zealand, 1,000 miles further across the water, never even earned a written plan. Your target is protected, among other things, by not being worth the spreadsheet. Which is not to say the country sat the century out. It did the opposite. Unable to be reached by the war, New Zealand exported itself to it, sending one of the highest shares of its population of any allied nation, and its 28th Maori Battalion carved out a reputation across North Africa and Italy. Ferocious enough that a famous line of praise for it is attributed to Field Marshal Rommel himself. This court must tell you no historian has ever verified that quote, so post it in the comments at your own risk. But the documented battle record that made the legend believable is not in dispute. The country nobody could invade kept producing soldiers other countries wished they had. There is one more entry in the modern file, and the court will lower its voice for it, because it is the only state attack on New Zealand in living memory, and it came from an ally. In July of 1985, in Auckland Harbor, agents of the French intelligence service attached mines to the Rainbow Warrior, a civilian ship belonging to the environmental group Greenpeace, which had been protesting French nuclear testing in the Pacific. The ship sank at its berth, and a photographer named Fernando Pereira was killed. Within days, ordinary New Zealand police detectives had caught 2 of the French agents. France denied everything, then admitted everything, and ultimately apologized and paid compensation, and the scandal reached all the way into the French government. Read the entry the way an auditor must. The one state that attacked this country in the last 80 years was a nuclear-armed friend. Its target was a boat. Its operation killed a civilian, and it was unraveled inside a fortnight by local cops. Even the successful attack on New Zealand goes down in the file as a defeat. So what would you actually face today? Around 9,000 regular troops, with reserves taking the total to roughly 15,000. 2 frigates. 4 brand new P-8 Poseidon aircraft, which is a small air force with a very specific personality, because the P-8 is a submarine hunter, meaning the nation with no fighter jets spent its money on exactly one kind of plane, the kind that finds and kills things approaching by sea. No combat jets since 2001, as advertised. A law since 1987 banning nuclear-armed and nuclear-powered warships from its harbors, which New Zealand applied even to the United States Navy, and which cost it the formal American defense guarantee, suspended since 1986. So let the record show, honestly, there is no treaty that obligates anyone to save New Zealand. And then let the record show what it has instead. Membership of Five Eyes. Australia 3 hours away with the entire Anglosphere behind it. And the small strategic reality that attacking the quietest, most likable member of that family is the single fastest way ever devised to unite the rest of it. Behind the thin green line stands the terrain, the Southern Alps rising past 12,000 feet, fjords, rainforest, and mountain country so severe and so unearthly that Hollywood used it, famously, to play Middle-earth, which means your mountain campaign will be fought, quite literally, across the filming locations of Mordor. The ground itself is on the active list, sitting on the Pacific Ring of Fire, crossed by the Alpine Fault, and hosting the Taupo supervolcano, whose eruption around the year 232 was, by the usual accounts, among the most violent anywhere on Earth in 5,000 years, with strange red skies reportedly noted as far away as Rome and China. Even the local wildlife files an objection. The Kia, the world's only alpine parrot, is nationally famous for landing on parked vehicles and stripping the rubber off them for entertainment. Your motor pool will be disassembled by birds with opinions. So let us read the bill, and this one contains the strangest line in the entire cabinet. Line 1, the approach. The longest amphibious crossing ever seriously contemplated, 5,500 miles minimum, no staging ground that is not family, tracked by the best surveillance alliance in history from the day you load, arriving against the one Air Force purpose-built to sink approaching ships. Line 2, the terrain, an alpine island chain that broke the Victorian Army's assaults when it was defended by a few thousand men with muskets and shovels, now garnished with fault lines, a supervolcano, and vandal parrots. Line 3, the garrison, and here is the strange part. At the standard ratio of 20 to 25 soldiers per 1,000 inhabitants, occupying 5.3 million people needs only around 110 to 130,000 troops, the cheapest occupation in this entire courtroom. And it does not matter, because the garrison is not the cost. The delivery is every soldier, ration, and spare part crossing the widest moat on Earth, forever, past the submarine hunters, while the family next door decides what to do about you. Line 4, the prize, grass, dairy, scenery, and a film industry, an economy of exports and tourists, both of which cease to exist the moment you arrive, leaving you the proud owner of the world's most heavily mortgaged sheep farm, on which your occupying army is outnumbered by the sheep. And now the final line item, the one I promised, the oldest in the records of this court. Every other nation measures its resistance to invasion in years or centuries. New Zealand's is measured against the whole human story. This land held off the entire species until the last chapter of the Great Migration, yielding only to the finest navigators who ever lived. The first European attempt to arrive was repelled with the visitors never touching the beach. The one empire that came in came by signature, and when its army later forced the question, the trenches said no. The busiest war of the 20th century never even drafted the plan. The only door humanity opened last has never once been opened by force, and your fleet is not going to be the first thing in 700 years to change that. The verdict of this court: invasion of New Zealand denied. Not because the defender is strong, it is cheerfully, deliberately, almost provocatively not. And not because anyone is treaty-bound to save it, because nobody is. Denied because the defense was never the army, it is an ocean the size of the sky, a family next door, an intelligence network with 5 sets of eyes, terrain that once beat an empire, and a moat with the longest winning streak in the history of our species. The country retired its fighter jets and lost nothing, because its real air force is distance, and distance has never once been shot down. Case number 10, closed. And with that, the first 10 files of this court are stamped and shelved, which means the docket is now open and the bench takes nominations. The jury picks the next defendant, so name the country you want on trial, one name down in the comments, and the most demanded file gets opened. New Zealanders and Māori viewers, the case file on your corrections is open too, and it is read. And if you want to be in the room when the next verdict drops, join the jury and subscribe, because the Iron Verdict Court is now and remains in session.